Welcome. Hi, I'm Weiser Cornell, and this is a webinar on loving the unlovable, which you might think of as a rather serious topic, but we're going to enjoy ourselves and play with this idea that it is possible to love every part of yourself, and that the process of naming something inside us as unlovable, or believing that some part of us is unlovable, is something that we can turn toward, get curious about, and it can transform. So I just want to share with you some slides. If you're calling on the phone, I'm going to describe what we're seeing, no worries. So this is me, Weiser Cornell, President and CEO of Focusing Resources. I'm the co-creator of Inner Relationship Focusing with Barbara McGavin. And one of my 4 books, the latest, is called Presence, a guide to transforming your most challenging emotions. So can you imagine loving everything about yourself? And does that even seem possible? Do you feel like you're a flawed, imperfect person deep down? Or does a part of you feel like you're a flawed, imperfect person deep down? And do you feel like you have to hide who you really are? Or maybe just hide those unlovable parts of you? Well, here's what we're going to discover today. That actually, unlovable is a process, not a truth. It's true. And that you might discover that those so-called unlovable parts of you are really lovable after all. Here's what we're going to do today. We hope you will come away with a new perspective on the process by which something in you is called disgusting or ugly or unlovable, why that happens, and a healthy dose of doubt that any part of you is actually unlovable. Just you won't necessarily believe that. And 3 simple ways to access your appreciation of yourself. Well, let's start with knowing that babies are adorable. I have these little baby creatures here. See, there's a baby pig, there's some baby kittens, baby dog, baby chick. This is not sure what that is, some kind of fox. So let's pause a moment and sense whether you can feel the rightness of that as a baby, right? The youngest time when you came into this world, you were adorable. You were born lovable. And here's the thing. What I mean by being born lovable comes from the philosophy of Eugene Gendlin, who taught me that life is process. Life wants to live. Life moves forward. And everything alive has an inner knowing of what would be right next. When you breathe in, you have an inner knowing that exhaling, breathing out is right next. And when you're hungry, that is an inner knowing that eating is right. And babies are born with a readiness built into them to be loved, to be treated with respect, to be cared for, to be held securely. It's too bad that doesn't always happen, but it doesn't take away the fact that the baby is born with an inborn readiness to be adored. And isn't it also true that unless human beings are hurt, we have an inborn readiness to adore babies? It's how we're built. It's the result of millions of years of evolution. Yeah? Are you with me on that? What happens if we pause and take in that idea that you were born lovable and ready to be loved? The like feeling in your body what that's like. To have, what does it mean to be ready to be loved? There's a kind of, what would that be like, right? To feel the openness and, okay, I'm ready. Feel that? Yeah. And Diane writes in the chat, what happens when we weren't loved? Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so what happened? Well, stuff happened. Things that were hard, like getting hit instead of being loved, or being turned away from by distracted parents, or being left alone. We don't want to blame anybody, but it's pretty clear that since when you were born, your parents' bodies had a readiness to love you. It could only have been because they themselves had been hurt, that they didn't give you that kind of love. Also, sometimes accident happens. Like maybe this baby stayed alone in her crib because there was an unavoidable accident that her parent or parents got into. Things happen, stuff happens that interferes with that process of giving and receiving love and care and attention. That's what we're all ready for when we're born, okay? And kids try to make sense of the world. And sadly, that can mean that when hard things happen, we decide that means there's something wrong with us. We draw the conclusion that it must be that I'm unlovable or that some part of me is unlovable. I know this very well because that's what happened to me. I had a dad who had come back from World War II with what we now know as PTSD. He went through some hard times that left him withdrawn into himself and especially unable to respond when a vulnerable child reached out to him and needed something from him. I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was, where's my dad? I reached for him and he turns away. I want to know where he is, and he's hiding in his study, hunched over his typewriter. Naturally, the little kid I was drew the conclusion that there's something wrong with her. I can't be loved was a belief that I carried for many years. And especially that the needy, reaching for love part of me was unlovable, because it seemed like, especially when I expressed that, is when I got rejected by my dad. So this is how the process works, unfortunately. I mean, it's very natural, it's very understandable, but it's tragic. Especially when there's nobody there to explain this to us, right? Maybe if my mom could have said, Dad, it can't give you what you need, sweetie, it's not your fault. But she didn't know that was going on. She couldn't do that. Janet wrote, leads me to the question, what was wrong with me that I wasn't loved? Exactly. I hope we now see how that happened. Yeah. And, and Diane writes, being born ready to be loved is helpful. And it's so different from believing there was something wrong with me. Yes. At least we can entertain that possibility that the belief that we were not lovable came from somewhere rather than being true. Yeah? So let's take another look at our slides. We're saying that kids try to make sense of the world, and that sadly that can mean deciding there's something wrong with us. And so deciding that something about us is unlovable and therefore needs to be hidden away, like my needy part needed to be hidden away, then there's a part of us that gets the job of enforcing that. And so the unlovable part stays hidden away. Now notice we're now talking about two different parts. We're talking about the part of us that gets labeled unlovable. And that could be the feeling that this is the deepest truth about me, like at my deepest essence, I am unlovable. And or it could be aspects of us, like our playfulness, like our loving nature, like our kind of rebellious or quote unquote mischievous parts. So something in us gets labeled unlovable, and then there's the part of us that's the labeler, right? In the picture here, you see this woman shaking her finger. A part of us gets the job of enforcing the unlovableness by labeling the other part of us as unlovable. And what we're going to discover is that changing that involves having a different kind of relationship with both of those parts of us. Both the part of us that feels like it's the one being called unlovable, and the part of us that calls it unlovable. Yeah? William writes, any kind of self-expression or standing up for myself gets labeled unlovable or wrong or bad. Yeah, what else are you noticing? Asking all of you here. Ask yourself right now, what are the parts of me that are labeled unlovable? And can we kind of see how that would have happened? Yeah. Look, young William, he stood up for himself, and that got called bad or punished, or, you know, in some families you get punished for things that are bad, and others you get, you know, turned away from. There's so many ways that caregivers can give the message, I don't want all of you, I just want that part of you. The good part, the cooperative part, the helpful part. Yeah, don't want all of you. BJ writes, too many religions and their practices and rituals deny this. And then they say we're born depraved. I'm so sad about that. Catherine writes, having my own opinion was punished. Yeah, having my own opinion. And Lily writes, my very essence was labeled as no damn good. Ooh, I feel so sad when I hear that. Tim writes, nothing I did was good enough. Nothing I did was good enough. So I wasn't good enough. Yes, see how the child's logic is a very, very logical process. If nothing I do is good enough, it must be that I'm not good enough. We can have a lot of compassion for that. And Madeline writes, part of me believes I need to be good to be lovable. Yes. Yes, there's this kind of message out there that being lovable is a reward for goodness, right? And what a different idea it would be if we have the idea that we were born lovable, we were lovable already. There wasn't anything we needed to do to deserve or earn lovableness. Just entertaining that idea. Yes. Yes, and Madeline says, being good meant agreeing with people and being fairly passive. Is that really the kind of adult we want to raise? I know it can make life a little easier if you train your children to be passive, but yes. Lucy May writes, it was my assertiveness. Yes. And Rob writes, as a gay guy growing up in a homophobic family, there was a lot to hide. Definitely. Yeah, my heart is with you there. And Sarah writes, Knowing my basic need and instinct to love and be loved was not met makes the accompanying grief so painful. Yes, you know, that is true. There's grief, there's grieving to do. There's grieving to do when we realize what would have been right, what we were born for, what we were ready for was loving and being loved, and that didn't happen. There's grieving to do. Grieving is a natural process and we can do it. And Ofer writes, my anger, yeah, unlovable, and any experience of frustration. Yes, and Merav writes, my need for my parents as a baby was labeled as spoiled. Yeah, we need our parents. We reach for them. They should reach back. That should be delightful when your kids reach for you. To have that labeled as spoiled, that's a label that was used to try to assert control over you. So this is one of the ideas of this work, is that labels like unlovable, spoiled, bad, and naughty, and so on, are used to control. They're used, selfish, right? They're used to control, and then we take them in and we believe them because that's the best we could do to make sense of the world. Yes. Yeah, and when I tried to get attention, I was stubborn, right? Stubborn's another one. It's wonderful to have a whole list of these labels. Yeah. So let's do an exercise now. I want to take you through a little process to start with a part of you that seems to be unlovable or bad or wrong, that you've been calling that, or you seems to be that way, okay? We'll go through that little process now of inner sensing, okay? So taking your time to settle into your body. Find a comfortable, supported position for yourself right now, usually sitting down, but for some of you it might be standing or lying down. And resting into the support that you feel there. Feeling your breathing, settling in, taking your time to slow down a little inside. Being aware in your body and the inner area of your body that includes your throat, chest, stomach, and belly. Feeling your breathing, feeling in the inner area of your body. And you are recalling that there is something in you that has been called unlovable, stubborn, spoiled, bad, no good. And even that there's a part of you that might believe that about it. And maybe put your hand on your heart and imagine that you're putting your hand on that part of you that's been called things like needy, unlovable, bad. Just putting a hand on it. Like you're saying to yourself inside, saying to that one, I know that was hard to be called that. I know that was difficult, that was painful. A part of you got called those names when it was just being itself. From another perspective, we can understand no wonder kids are assertive or stand up for themselves or do things or try to do things. No wonder. Isn't that human? No wonder kids say no sometimes. Wouldn't it be terrible to live a human life and never say no? Those parts of us got called those names, but that wasn't the truth. It was a process of control. And as you're sitting here right now, all I'm asking you to do is give some compassion to how hard it must have been to be told, to be given those labels for something in you that was really natural and beautiful. You don't have to completely believe me right now, but just try it out, see what happens. And now let's move to a part of you that calls the part unlovable. If you've got a sense of something in you that's kind of worried or scared that if we don't keep calling this part unlovable, it'll come out and other people will see it. Might be a sense of this is dangerous what we're doing right now. Something in you might think this is dangerous. Something in you might think that we're allowing something to emerge that would get you in trouble if other people see it. Let's just notice if that's true. And then say it this way, there's something in me that thinks it's dangerous to stop labeling these parts of me, to consider them as good instead of bad. Something feels it's dangerous. Okay, hello to that one. I neither believe it nor don't believe it. I don't agree or disagree, but I am saying hello to it. And I am saying, I bet you're trying to protect me. Turning toward the labeling one, the one that gives the label, and saying, maybe you're trying to protect me from something. Just pausing to see what happens there. Nice. All right. So in a minute, we'll complete this little exercise. Before we do, take a little time to feel that you are present for both of these parts of you. The one that has carried the hurt of being called those names, and the one that's rather worried about what will happen if this changes. And that you can say, I am here with both. Feel your grounding, feel your breathing, let your shoulders go back and say, and I am here with both. So nice. And if any part of this exercise was difficult, just noticing that. Because even if you could do some of it, that was a step. All right, so now thanking your body, thanking your parts, noticing what you want to remember, and letting awareness come back, emerging into the room. And I'm so curious how this was for you. So do let me know, let us know. Yeah. Jim has an interesting question in the chat. It has to do with parts that have done things that are unacceptable. You know, you can love a person, but not love everything they do. And we'll come back to that point a little later in the webinar. Paula writes, my unloved part is sad and I feel a lot of tears. Yes. How beautiful to be able to be present for that one. For the tears that have probably been waiting to be cried, and that you can be there with that one that's felt unloved all these years. So nice. I'm so glad. And BJ wrote, some part is worried like a sibling, like we'd better behave. Mm-hmm. And another part is worried like the caregiver, you'd better behave. Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Maybe you've got several parts there that are both watching over this to make sure that nothing dangerous happens. Yeah. Catherine writes, wow, there is really a part that's trying to keep me from being vulnerable, so I'm not abandoned. Isn't that cool? I love it. Very nice. And Lily writes, I sensed something in me felt intolerant and wants to get rid of the bad one so we can be loved. Very good. That's a step. It believes the bad one is the barrier to being loved. You could give it compassion for that belief without agreeing with it. And Madeline writes, I was amazed at how frightened the part was that didn't want me to make bad mistakes and tries to keep me from doing the wrong thing. Yes, exactly. It seems at first to be some kind of taskmaster teacher kind of part, but it's actually frightened itself for you. And that's what can open our heart to that kind of part, is that it's trying to save us from something. Yeah, and Kristen writes, I'm sad for the one so afraid to control the other part. Exactly. Exactly. Rebecca writes, this is huge. Yay. I got to see how invested someone who's still saying those things to and about me is in controlling me. Yes, the early childhood dynamic is going on now. So exciting. You know, the childhood casts a long shadow, but that can also change. And what I've seen is that these kinds of inner dynamics change when we can be self in presence. And self in presence is the ability to not be either of the parts, but to be compassionate toward both. So that process of compassion for the one that's called unlovable and the one that's so frightened that it calls it unlovable. And I can be there with both. And that is a transformational process that can actually change these tough dynamics. Yes. Lucy May writes, I felt often I wasn't lovable, but I never heard that from my parent. Instead, I heard that I was too sensitive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yes, you can be with that part now. I'm going to go on. I'm just basking in how happy it makes me that those of you who are writing in the chat got something from this exercise. So nice. We have more though. Here's my point. One of my points is that shame is a secret protector, right? We're talking about shaming here, aren't we? I mean, labeling. So the shaming labeling process is not about what is true, but it's about fear and control. So the one doing the shaming has fear and is trying to control. And I especially know that that's true inside you. And it's probably true when other people shame you as well, that they're doing it out of some kind of fear and certainly a need to control. And so there's parts of us that fear what would happen if other parts of us are seen. Parts of us fear what would happen if other parts of us are seen. So here's the thing. Contrary to what the messages were, being lovable is not a reward for good behavior. And it's not a reward for conformity to the norm. They might have wanted us to behave well, and they might have wanted us to conform to the norm, but they were wrong to say we were unlovable if we didn't. And maybe they never said that, but this child logic that says I must be the problem if I'm not loved and accepted and attended to and welcomed the way my body is ready for. Maybe it's inside us that we may draw that conclusion about being unlovable. Either way, being lovable is not a reward for good behavior or conformity to a norm. It simply is. And every part of us can be loved, and every one of us can love ourselves. Let's go back and talk about 3 simple ways to access your love for all your parts. So number 1, remember that as with children, you can love a part of you without loving its behavior. You can love what it's trying to do for you instead. I think I'll just come back and talk to you a little bit more about that. Because sometimes people consider parts of themselves unlovable. And it's because those parts they feel have been responsible for mistakes that have hurt themselves and other people, like out of control behavior, inappropriate behavior, and so on. So a part of us thinks that those parts responsible for those behaviors have to be locked up and shut away, disapproved, not allowed to ever emerge. Now, that's a very understandable process. The problem is that, first of all, it doesn't work very well because parts like that don't take to being locked up very well. They tend to come out and do it anyway. Like the anger bursts out and you find yourself yelling at somebody, or but I thought I told my anger to never come out. I thought I locked it away. Well, that's not really possible to lock away a part of ourselves. So what's going on there is that there is a part of you disapproving another part of you because of its fear that the other part will hurt you and other people again. I would recommend that instead of having one part police another part, you step in there, self in presence, and acknowledge the fear of a part of you that will happen again, and acknowledge the other part for its behavior trying to do something for you. You know, I know this so well because I recovered from using alcohol addictively, using this process. There was a part of me that would drink until I was drunk and then ignore my friends or my family or everything. I was not proud of its behavior. But I also knew that a part of me wasn't going to be able to lock it up. So I needed to turn toward the part that was scared of it and turn toward the part of it that wanted to drink. Because from my larger self, it was clear to me that drinking like that wasn't right and that I would stop. But the part of me that wanted to drink had a lot to tell me about what it was trying to do for me by drinking. So rather than locking away our parts and calling them unlovable, which is not a very successful way to be your full self, turn toward them and listen to what they're feeling and trying to do for us. We don't have to agree with the behavior they want to take. When I listened to the part that wanted to drink, I found out it wanted to help me be relaxed more quickly, wanted to help me be more creative, more spontaneous. And as I did that, as I listened to it from self and presence, it was completely clear. I didn't even have to decide it. It was completely clear that I could be spontaneous and relaxed. I didn't need the help of that part, but I could certainly thank it for what it was trying to do for me. Why did I choose a frog? Well, I love frogs. I think they're adorable, but some people don't. So that's why I picked a frog, because I think it's something that we can see both ways, as both unlovable and lovable. And in my culture, when I grew up, the frog that can become a prince or princess when you kiss it is another part of our legends. So when you embrace the unlovable part of you, it can transform in that same way. Yeah. Well, Lily writes, the intolerant one who hates the bad one now feels pain itself. That's big. That's a big step. Yes. So beautiful. Okay, that was number one, which was that you can love a part of you. It's like with your children, right? Keep loving your children no matter what they do, and that doesn't mean letting them do whatever they want to do. No, sweetie, I love you, and you cannot try to kill the cat. You can love what the part's trying to do for you. So number two, remember that the part of you that's being called unlovable has its own point of view. You can let it tell its own story. Let me come back and talk about what I mean by that. If we find a part of us inside that's been called unlovable, we actually don't know much about it. The label unlovable is not a description of the part. And I can see from what people have been writing in the chat that you were able to get in more direct contact with the part of you that's been called unlovable, to feel that from its point of view, it's sad, or it has life energy in it, and so on. So that's really the step that I'm asking, inviting all of you to take, which is turning toward something that's been labeled unlovable, bad, selfish, spoiled, and so on, and just get curious about its point of view, its experience of the world, what it's like for it, what it was like for it back then. And that's when it's even more likely that you'll feel the essential lovableness of that part of you. Yeah, so sensing it from its point of view. Let's go back and see the third one. So the third one is a process of putting a gentle hand on your heart. Let's do this together right now. Putting a gentle hand on your heart and whispering inside yourself, I love you. I love you. And notice what in you responds to that. Putting a gentle hand on your heart. Just whispering inside yourself, I love you. And noticing what in you responds to that. That's a practice you can do all day long. And wouldn't that be different? What other questions do you have for me, or what does this bring up for you? Where does this leave you? Doug writes, it's saying back, everything is okay. Wow. So beautiful. Well, Farah writes, it's hard to love it. Maybe because I can't figure what it's trying to do for me with these actions. So you're saying that there's a part of you that does certain actions, and that's why it's hard to love it. Yeah. And here's my suggestion for you. Rather than trying to figure out what it's trying to do for you, ask it. And the way I would suggest asking it is, I wonder what you want for me from you doing that. Wonder what you want for me. I wonder what qualities, another way to say it would be, I wonder what qualities you're trying to bring me. Being able to be myself, being spontaneous, being expressive. And sometimes when something about us is disapproved, it's sent into exile. We talk about this in the course. When we exile a part of ourselves, we push it completely away. Like assertiveness, the speaking up for myself, if that gets exiled, then it comes back in, like it has to sneak out through the cracks, and then it's explosive, or it has a bite to it. So parts of us are trying to do things for us, even if we don't agree with the way they do it. Right? We don't have to agree with the way. So I said, I love you, and it said back to me, so what? You aren't anything special. That's Janet. Yeah. And so that sounds like a part of you that is really longing to receive love from somebody special. If possible, you would just say that to it. I really get you're longing to receive love from somebody who's really special. I hear you. Alex writes, it's given me a stomach ache. Okay, so let's be with the ache in the stomach and just sense how it feels. Say hello to it and be patient. William I got an experience of my mother loving me, but immediately running off for some distraction, and that was very confusing. Yes, it was. Gosh, I feel sad when I think about the kids growing up now with their parents getting lost in their phones. If you are a parent of a child, I urge you to keep your phone turned off when you're with that child. I said, I love you, and something said back, I hate you. So I would suggest saying back to it, wow, you feel really strongly about that. I'm listening. There will be another step. And if that's a part that feels like it's been downtrodden, pushed around, beaten up, that could be the reason that it's angry. Well, that was what I really wanted to tell you today. There's this beautiful quote by Rilke with another gorgeous frog. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. And I would say perhaps everything that has been called unlovable is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. But I wouldn't agree with helpless. I would say that our empowerment is also waiting in there to be loved. And that we can do.